critical race theory. And I'm not going to say anything about it because my two speakers are going to do all that work for me. So I'm going to introduce the speakers, let them get talking. They're going to briefly introduce their ideas and their thoughts at the head of a discussion with you. So we'll go straight out and take some questions from the audience once we're done. So let me introduce them in the order in which they're going to speak. And on the right-hand side here is Kunle Olulode, Director of Voice for Change England. And on my left-hand side is Dr. Nikos Sotirakopoulos, who's a visiting fellow. Did I say that right?
95%.
No, I just tested you, I didn't even dare ask. And he's a visiting fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute and an instructor at the Ayn Rand University. And he is the author of this book, Identity Politics and Tribalism in the New Culture Wars, and it's available in the bookshop here, just around the corner, I think, outside this room. Yeah, and that's it. Introduce them. Would you like to start, Kunle, with your contribution?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming to this session. We're about to have a discussion on probably the most amorphous and troubling set of ideas that I've come across in my 35-odd years as an anti-racist. Critical race theory purports to be a structural analysis of racism, but it also sees the problem of racism as almost biologically inherent. A feature of white society, whiteness, white supremacy, white privilege. Indeed, anybody white is implicated in a racist conspiracy. Challengers like myself and minoritized communities are described as often having internalized racism, dismissed as apologies for racism, and indeed for society as a whole, and its white supremacist outlook. For me, I think that the interesting thing about the subject is some of the origins and some of the kind of early brushes in my life with critical race theories. I think most people are probably aware of some of the recent contemporary theorists coming out of Columbia Law College. Professors like Kimberly Crenshaw, Kendall Thomas, and Patricia Williams. And you've probably even come across from D'Angelo's book, White Fragility. But for me, I think we need to go back in time and look at the civil rights movement of the 1960s and the successful legal cases that were taken up, particularly in the educational sphere, in terms of school segregation. And one of the kind of leading figures within that movement was Professor Derek Bell, who was a key legal litigationist who, I think, over 300 cases he prosecuted to desegregate schools. But Bell, in terms of reflecting on that time, came to the conclusion that, in fact, as schools were being desegregated legally, the schools found themselves with a situation where white parents were withdrawing their kids and putting them and busing them out to other schools. So in effect, those desegregated schools became resource-starved, but also, more importantly, educational standards declined. He more or less concluded that the attempt at desegregation, even though it might have been successful legally, actually left the educational system that faced black children in a poor state. And in fact, he almost pretty much renounced what he'd actually succeeded in doing, and I think set up a series of rules that basically suggested that they would be better off segregated but well resourced. And I think that there's a kind of logic to that, which we can debate about in the discussion. The other person who kind of flies under the radar, and somebody that is not so talked about now, but certainly in the 80s and 90s, was an incredibly influential figure, perhaps more influential than even some of the current theories, is Dr. Cress Welsing. I met Dr. Cress Welsing around about 1988, and was a friend of mine, Jack Leach, in the audience. You may even remember that this private gathering of individuals from London met with Dr. Cress Welsing, I think in London University, to receive her ideas around race equality. Welsing at that time was an assistant professor at Howard University. She first formulated a body of work in 1969, the Cress theory of colour confrontation, and self-published it in 1970. The paper subsequently appeared in May 1974 in an edition of the Black Scholar. This was an introduction of her thoughts that will be developed into what are known as the ISIS papers 22 years later. I think it was around about 1992, she released the ISIS papers, a compilation of essays she had written about global and local race relations. But just to summarize, in general, she believed that injustice caused by racism will end when non-white people worldwide recognize, analyze, and understand and discuss openly the genocidal dynamic of white supremacy. She also tackled issues such as drug use, murder, teen pregnancy, and infant mortality, incarceration, and unemployment within the black community. According to Welsing, the issue and the cause of all of these things was white supremacy. The white man's race to the top. Black men were at the center of Welsing's discussion because, according to her, they have the greatest potential to cause white genetic annihilation. Now, at the time, I have to say, at the discussion at London University, I thought she was a complete crackpot. But I have to say, I was the only person in the room who thought she was a crackpot. The academics that were there, the anti-racists that were there, took her views very seriously. The notion of racism as a conspiracy to ensure white genetic survival, she attributed to AIDS and addiction to crack cocaine and other substances, essentially a chemical biological warfare by white people. Probably the most significant contemporary expression of our ideas came with the Public Enemy album, 1990, Fear of a Black Planet. The theoretical underpinnings of that album probably went over the heads of most music critics. But at the time, having been exposed to Cress Welsing's ideas, I understood what they were getting at. The album itself explores the themes of organisation and empowerment within the black community and social issues affecting African Americans. The record's criticism of institutionalised racism, white supremacy, and the parody were very much inspired by Welsing's ideas. And I should say that even the meeting that was held in London was authored by Adai Sekipo, the founder, interestingly enough, of the Black History movement in this country, and the founder member of the first Black History program. So, in terms of her influence, it was quite significant. But the notion of white supremacy as a concept and idea certainly today has been expanded. When I was a young activist, white supremacy from us meant Jim Crow laws in the American South, the anti-apartheid laws in South Africa, the most extreme manifestations of racism. In terms of critical race theory, race supremacy, and white supremacy in particular, becomes centre stage. That is the norm. And for me, as an anti-racist, I have huge problems with this, because I do not understand how you can theorize about racism and come to the conclusion that the antidote is to racialize another section of the populace as a counteracting measure. And I think that that is, in a way, I suppose, is a fairly crude response. And there are certain nuances, and it's a much more slippery concept than I'm probably giving credit for. But in the time it's available to me, I need to actually get that across, because I think in terms of the direction of the introduction of this as a respectable discourse, particularly within our academic institutions, and worse still, within the legal profession, is going to cause us problems in the here and now. And I'd be interested to hear from people in the audience your own take on this, but also are there aspects to this theorizing that actually has merit? I'd also be interested to hear what people think about the suggestion coming out of government of taking legal action against people who profess these ideas in academic institutions. So I'll leave it there.
Around this time last year, I was introducing a 16-week course on critical race theory, so I said, okay, let's do some research about it. So I go to my library, I have a huge shelf on social science textbooks, on social science reader, and I go to the contents of each book trying to find critical race theory. Nothing. Then I say, okay, maybe it's not in the name of a chapter, maybe I'm missing something, I go to the index, critical race theory, critical race theory. In most of the books, there was nothing, or maybe one or two references. And my books are not that old. They were from around 2012, 2015. And I thought, how odd. The set of ideas that is dominating the public sphere these days, the set of ideas that have created such a fire in the culture war, were not even in the books, literally in the sociology books 5 years ago. Although the theory, as we said, is quite old. It goes back to the 80s. So the question is why? Why is it a formerly obscure theory, a theory that very few people have read, suddenly became so big? The obvious answer is that in 2020, people were in search for a narrative to explain the injustice they saw in front of them on TV. But I think there's a second reason. And the reason is that critical race theory is an umbrella under which most of the bad ideas and the bromides of the philosophy of the last 40, 50 years have found a house. And also critical race theory is America's self-hate and self-disdain finding a voice. And let me elaborate what I mean with these two. What have we been hearing from all prominent philosophers since the 50s? That universal humanism is a scam. That universal liberalism is a Eurocentric approach. And what has been then the antidote that has been given us? Identity politics. Well, what is CRT other than identity politics in steroid? Similar to its cousin, to its philosophical cousin, which is white nationalism. What have we been hearing since time immemorial? That we don't understand the world through reason, because reason is not something which is universal. There is white reason, black reason, working class reason, male reason, and female reason. What does CRT tell us? Oh, maybe in court there was not a single evidence that the killer of George Floyd was racist, but my lived experience tells me that he was racist. How can you challenge that, if not by reason? We've been hearing for ages that institutions such as the rule of law or private property are a tool of domination of the white class or a tool of domination of capitalism. What does CRT tell us? That we need to get rid of these institutions. And so that you don't think I'm strawmanning, this is from Delgado and Stefansi's very short quote, their book with the title Critical Race Theory. So they say, quote, CRT questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. So your average conservative friend on Facebook will tell you that CRT is, quote, Marxism or communism. Actually, it's much worse. Because it wants to undermine not an economic system, it wants to undermine the noble principles and values that underpin the system, which is equality in front of the law, the right to hold property, and what we understand by capital. And by the way, these are the principles that have liberated and corrected every injustice in history. The idea that we are human beings, individual human beings, and we all have the same, and we all have a moral value. What else have we been hearing for decades? That human beings have no agency, that we cannot change history, that history is things happening to us. What does critical race theory say? What does Derek Bell say? He has this thing called convergence theory, which means that every progress that has happened in racial relations is a gift by the white elite to the still oppressed black community. This is another way to tell to Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King, you didn't achieve that. Because you can achieve nothing, you have no agency. What a horrible idea, and yet unfortunately, what a popular idea these days. And when it comes to the United States, we've been told time and again that the core of that country is rotten. That things like the American dream or meritocracy are just a myth. And this is why in 2020 so many people were eager to say yes, down with this country. So how do we fight these bad ideas? Two ways. The first is, first of all, to properly understand it. And properly understanding will go beyond cliches like this is neo-Marxism or they want to destroy the West or whatever. Because if you don't understand something, you can't criticize. The most important thing is to fight the, as you said, racial and racist theory which is here. We have to take away from it the ground on which it stands. And the ground on which it stands is two popular beliefs. The first popular belief is that human beings understand the world based on their identity, based on their group. We need to take this idea and throw it to the bin and make great again the idea that no, we understand the world through our own minds. There is no white mind, there is no female mind, there is no as a woman I think, as a Greek I think. No, it's only I think. You take this away from critical race theory, the whole thing collapses. And the other thing we need to throw to the bin is this idea that we are avatars of our identity, that we live for the group, that if Kanye West, who by the way talks full of crap, but the fact that Kanye West doesn't follow the party line means he's not called real black. What does this mean? You don't live for your identity, you don't think for your identity, you don't think for your group. You think and you live for yourself. You do form groups with other people because this is something that makes life so much better, but you form a group based on values. Not your gender, not your color, not your ethnicity even, irrespective of what the racists of the left or the racists of the right are telling you. So this is the way to get rid of critical race theory, because we cannot have justice, however you want to call it, racial justice, social justice, or simple justice, if we don't base it on the proper principles. Thank you.
Okay, some hands up here, and gosh, there's a gentleman there on the end. Could you ask him, and then the gentleman there, and I'll move from side to side. Yeah.
I think the first speaker made the interesting point that he regarded the sorry? Sorry. I think the first speaker made the interesting point that when he first encountered these theories, he regarded the proponents of them as a crackpot, entirely reasonably. There have been crackpot theories for generations. Of course, the difficulty is those who seek to seize power and abuse that power rely, if they can, on crackpot theories in order to do so. And so long as there are people who are willing to believe in crackpot theories, there is always a danger that people can seize power and abuse their power. So isn't the real danger tolerance of unreason? And that isn't a recent thing. Even looking back 30 years ago, there was a great deal of tolerance of people who believed in alternative medicine or paranormal or some that kind of insanity. isn't the real answer permanently to end all tolerance of unreason.
That gentleman there. Yeah, okay. And then could you pass it behind? Yeah. Would you? Yeah.
Age before beauty. Fascinating, both of you, really interesting, and I substantially agree. One thing, as a historian, these ideas have been circulating for longer than you might think, in that they were circulating definitely in the 1990s. They were quite common in US stuff where we're looking at it. It's part of what I look at is these race theories throughout history. You can also point to the basis of this as being W.B. Du Bois' Wages of Whiteness, which of course was over 100 years ago. But I think it's become substantially different now. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, and I'd like you to comment on, is the export of these ideas. Because one thing about US race relations, they're entirely different than what happens in the UK. There's a really massive difference between the two. As somebody who studies it over the, I'm not going to give statistics, but you can statistically say that there are massive differences in the way that these issues operate. Why? It seemed to me with George Floyd that all of these ideas just were taken uncritically across the Atlantic, as if it applies in France and Morocco and Britain as much as it did in the US. So I'd be interested in what you have to say about that.
Hold on a minute, there's a lady there.
So I'm going to be really greedy. I've got one question. I go to Goldsmiths University. I deliberately chose that university because I know it's the wokest university in the country. That's why I chose it, because I thought it'd be funny, right? Day number one, a girl comes up to me and says, I'm so sorry for being white. So I don't know how I respond to that question, and I'll be fascinated to hear how you respond to that statement.
And now, you can have that lady there and put your hand up there, and then go next.
It's the question of domination that worries me. And it looks like, for example, if I take the example of slavery, free speech allowed, if I may. Free speech allowed, I want to talk about slavery as an easy example. As you can see, I'm not white. Why is it that I am educated about Christians doing slave trade, but I'm not educated about Muslims doing slave trade? So when Christian white people do it, it's wrong. But when Muslims do it around Africa, I mean, I don't know the history, I'm not a scholar, then it's a great civilization. I don't understand that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, and just to say a really interesting thing from you both. And I work in local government where they do teach critical race theory as fact, and I've had colleagues that have been disciplined for disagreeing with critical race theory. They've also spent £100,000 on CRT whilst cutting frontline jobs, that kind. So that their priorities are totally wrong. And may I just say, if you try to say to somebody they have white privilege on a working class estate in Yorkshire, you'll just be laughed at. You know, there is, you know, as you know, this first speaker rightly said, it's racism in itself. So my question is this: Kemi Badenoch has said some very, I would say, progressive and good things about how critical race theory is. It should not be taught as fact. And I just want, I just would like to ask the panel's views on that. Thank you.
I'm going to go right to the back now, because there's people up the back. There's a lady up there with a hand up in a white top, and over there for a second one, and then I'll come back to the panel. Again at the back, there's a gentleman over there. Can you? Yeah.
Question to the panel. How do we engage with this? I just do not know how. I walked into a meeting, it wasn't even a meeting on racism, it was a meeting at an international conference of abortion providers that was running a session on white supremacy in abortion provision. and I asked the question stupidly why we were talking about white supremacy and not racism, which was the way it was discussed the last time I was in the meeting. The meeting was suspended for 3 minutes while the platform dealt with the hostile question that had been asked. They then came back and told me that I needed to educate myself. The problem, it's a genuine question. I just don't know how we get over this barrier of how we talk about this when it's so polarised.
Thank you. And just one more, that gentleman, then I'm going to come back to you to maybe give some answers or thoughts and comments.
I noticed when Rupert Hutt criticised Kwasi Kwarteng, it was on the grounds that when you listen to him on the radio, you wouldn't know he is black. And to my mind, that really gets to the essence of the problem, which is that the woke want to constantly hype up differences on the basis of race. And in some ways, the answer to the question that's just been posed is, how do we deal with this? And I think we need to deal with it by making the case for assimilation. Because, of course, Kwasi Kwarteng is a very good example of someone who is totally assimilated, which is why he so irritates the left. Not only does he sound like any other Brit, dresses like any other Brit, but also he has conservative ideas, which, of course, plenty of Brits have. And my point is that no one talks about assimilation these days, which simply means you connect with a national framework of ideas. And yet they used to talk about it all the time in America. It was the notion of the melting pot. But it's completely gone out of fashion these days. People sometimes talk about integration, which is actually just a very weak form, which is actually an accommodation to difference and to multiculturalism. So do we not need to make the case for assimilation?
Thanks. I'm going to come back to the panel, and I think that thinking about some of those questions, there's questions about, obviously, what do we do about it and how do we address it, including how you personally or individually address the ideas that come forward from this theory. But I think, again, we're looking at the intellectual roots of it, and there have been some interesting questions there about the kind of jumping across from the United States to ideas here, but also the idea of the melting pot. Again, that's an idea that very much I would associate with the United States. And so there's been a change, and it is interesting, I think, to consider not just changes in ideas in a kind of intellectual sense, but are there any structural reasons? Is there things that are happening in societies that are bringing what some people regard as crackpot ideas to the fore? So lots of things there to think about and lots of questions. We'll get some responses from you and maybe get out for another round, but would you like to start off, Kunle?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin's question about don't you the question about Du Bois, I mean, it's not the same actually, because we shouldn't preclude the possibility of development and maturity of people. And Du Bois, of course, over time, changed his ideas in several different phases, and to the point of joining the Communist Party. So I don't think it's actually the same. I think that in relation to where we're at, why now? It's rooted in the sense that, well, if, for example, every institution, every school, every college purports to have an anti-discriminatory program, policy, set of principles, why is it that the same inequalities still are able to persist and recreate themselves in a different time and space? So until we actually answer that question, I think the crackpots still have some resonance in society, which is that, well, if the problem is not their lack of policy, it actually has to be something that is inherent within people. And I think it's cracking that problem, which is the issue. In relation to how do we address it, I think also issues of social unity and social cohesion are important. And certainly, I was up last weekend in South Yorkshire with the Black Caucus of the National Fire Brigades Union, giving an exposition on anti-racism over the last 30 years, when of course somebody talked about white privilege. hands on. I criticised it and said basically, I'm not signed up to that. I don't believe that it's a viable system of ideas that actually has meaning. And nobody came back on me. But the following day, somebody said something to the effect, and this is the evidence of white privilege. So the fact that even organisations like the Fire Brigade, which incidentally are about to consider the ballot for strike action nationally, where you're going to have to bring black and white firefighters together in order to consider the tactics of going forward. How do you form unity? How do you actually gel people together with a common purpose and outlook? And I think that has to be where the solution lies. But it's kind of, how do you do that in a school? I think educationalists have to actually, unfortunately, stick their necks out and challenge some of this stuff. But I know that it's not easy. I work in the charity sector, which is completely consumed by it. And certainly, to stick one's neck out can be career-ending. So we have to find, I suppose, forms where we can begin to challenge that actually doesn't put ourselves at risk. But at the same time, we have to be able to take risks in order to make change.
I think we answers together on how we challenge it, how we fix it, and all that stuff. So the first thing is that we need to address the injustice in a better way. Critical race theory, despite all its problems, was addressing something which wasn't easy. Racism has always been a problem. It's way much better than it used to be. But we have to do a better job than critical race theory. And many good theorists had a blind spot for racism, particularly post-civil rights. So we have to do a better job than there. The second thing we need to do is to focus on what is the essence of racism. So I would engage these people. You don't like racism, right? Why do you like racism? By the way, usually there they block. Oh, you don't like racism, or the answer should be you don't like racism because it destroys your mind and it destroys the way you view people. Instead of viewing people as individuals, you view them and valuing and judging them as individuals, you view them as a group. Therefore, saying all white people makes you part of the problem. So if you're addressing a rational mind or an open mind, at least this will put a seed on their head that, oh, wait a minute, am I the body here as the dream goes. On the issue of assimilation, why there is no attempt to assimilation? Assimilate to what? What does it mean to be British today? Or to be American today? What are the values of who is standing up for these values? So there's nothing to assimilate on, unfortunately. And the last thing to our friend who said, someone told you I'm so sorry to be white. This makes as much sense as me going to a Persia and saying we kick your ass in marathon and in Thermopylae back in the day. I didn't have anything to do with it. Because Leonidas and Miltiades, I can be inspired by it or I can learn lessons by it. But saying I take credit for marathon is absolutely crazy. So again, I would try to address that person rationally to whatever point was.
I'm going to try and take, I'm sorry, there's so many hands up there, and I know there's people at the front and at the back, but I'm going to take a couple from the middle, because I've kind of ignored people in the middle. There's a guy there on the sort of window seat with his hand up.
Just response to the question over here.
Yes.
Self-loathing does not make you a better anti-racist. That would be my response.
I thought Nikos made a fantastic point, actually. Assimilate to what is a really key conundrum. I've spent my life talking a lot about the prevent duty and anti-terrorism, and people talking about de-radicalisation. And for some years I've always asked people, de-radicalise to what? It's the same problem, actually. If your society does not attract the energy and enthusiasm of young people and provide them with systems to believe in and belong to, then you've got a fundamental problem. So, maybe as a society we do have to reflect on that. I don't have any answers. I just wanted to raise a deeper problem, actually. I was teaching on the west coast of Canada this summer to some doctoral students, one of whom came from the University of Oregon. And she's very idealistic, so in the US, and obviously has absorbed a lot of this. And her critique, when I did a class on identity politics, was that she couldn't relate to the readings because they included things like Ken Malick's 1996 Meaning of Race book, and other readings from 2012 and 2016, and her complaint was, these are all too old. Which is also a point Nikos made at the beginning about how fast this has happened. Now, here's what has just dawned upon me in this conversation. They're reading a canon that emerged in the last few years, and they're not engaging with anything before that anyway, because they see it as irrelevant to their lived experience. And that's a challenge which goes way beyond racism, because you've got young people, and of course this canon is now prolific because there's more and more shoddy universities churning out more and more shoddy papers for academics' publication targets. They're all citing one another, and that's what she's looking for. And if you pose something challenging that was written only a decade or so ago, it's too difficult to engage with.
And I'm not going to take everyone, I'm afraid, because we're going to take maybe one more after this and come back to the panel. We've got so little time, we're really sorry.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's possible to say that in the way that Bell described the origins of critical race theory, Derek Bell, it did ask an important question. It asked the question, why is it in an age of legal equality that there's still inequality? And I think we have to give that to the critical race theory. The problem is the way the theory developed was along a rejection of the possibility and desirability of any kind of colored line in society. So it's the way it developed as well. Just very, very quickly, I'm part of a group called Don't Divide Us, which is mainly in schools, but also in the universities we've been looking into taking this on. And unlike Nico, I don't want to get rid of critical race theory, or at least that's not my main aim. My main aim is to stop it being the official ideology of human resource departments in universities, which literally is a bad that all lectures have to be trained by name-check critical race theory alongside unconscious bias and other divisive theories like this. So what this does is it kind of affirms critical race theory as a sort of underlying norm and makes it very difficult for people to take it on. So that's where the real battle is for free speech and openness around discussing this theory. And I actually think the fact it is an official theory is something we can make a deal on. There are plenty of young people, black and white, anti-racist, who can see an HR department's disciplinary measure against something that's truly emancipatory for people.
Thanks very much. And I've been shown a yellow card, I think. That's quite bad, isn't it? So I think I'm going to have to say thanks for all the contributions we've had so far, but we have to give our speakers a chance to respond to that. And I'll start with you, like Nikos. It's a kind of summary of your final thoughts, but responding to anything from the floor. A couple of minutes.
Yeah. On the last point, which is very important. So what we see in conservatives doing in the United States is passing state-level legislation against critical race theory. This, in a way, has the same problem as critical race theory itself, which is a disdain for ideas, a disdain for humans having agency, a disdain for humans being able to judge right for wrong. So when I say getting rid of CRT, I mean getting rid of its bad premises. Definitely not curtailing people's free speech on it. Now the question is, what do you do with state education? This becomes the official dogma. This is almost unsolvable. I'm not in favor of the state saying what should be taught. How you negotiate this, good luck, and whoever is a teacher has to deal with this. And what was the? Oh yeah, I'm drawing a blank, so I will leave this as my last point. The enemy is not critical race theory. The enemy are the premises that underpin it, and particularly the premise that human beings have no agency to understand the world and fight for a better world and create a better world and write history. And yeah, I'll finish with that.
something that as humans do.
No, I very much agree with the sentiment that at the level of ideas, we have to challenge critical race theory. Using legislation to challenge the crack and lump is not the right approach. In my view, the introduction of the law is going to make this more complex, and indeed the response is to give credibility to critical race theory that I don't think it warrants. One of the things that struck me in terms of preparing for this talk was to reread some of the kind of critical race theories. One of the interesting things I came across was the opening section of Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, where she actually states that identity is the vehicle of change. And I thought that's quite a powerful thing to set out, because in terms of my anti-racist practice and in my experience, the notion that identity alone is the vehicle of change is a theoretical error of vast proportions, and yet it's there in the first 3 pages. In every movement for change, it's certainly the case that people who have been oppressed have responded to their oppression. But the alliances and the build and the nature of change has always been built through a wide variety of different collaborations and unifying factors. And I think that seems to be something that's been lost in terms of the protagonists of critical race theory, which is that how do you actually build unity in the here and now? And this is going to become a key question, not just for people involved in the race sphere, but for people involved in politics generally, because we need to build, I think, a new set of ideas that are unifying factors that bring people together. Critical race theory does not have the substance to do that. And I think that is one of the ways in which this can be exposed. But we have to be more sophisticated and more contemporary in the way we do that. We cannot talk to somebody who's 16 years old and say to them simply that race relations have improved and things have got better, when they're looking at the world through the prism of George Floyd and a whole raft of videos on Facebook and various social media, which tells them something different. We've got to actually take on board how they see the world and how they would see changing it, and begin to actually bring to the fore, I think, our experience, our knowledge, and our understanding in terms of how to counteract some of these backward ideas. Thank you.
Thank you.